They laughed first. In the dark fields outside the Eastern Front, German soldiers heard a strange sound drifting through the night, not the roar of engines, not the scream of dive bombers, but something softer, almost whispering. Many smirked. Some mocked it as a child's toy in the sky. And then, without warning, bombs fell out of total silence, tearing men from their sleep before they could even scream. If you enjoy deeply human war stories like this, consider subscribing. It's 1941. Nazi Germany has launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Millions of soldiers surge eastward, convinced the Soviet Union will collapse in weeks. The Wehrmacht sees itself as modern, mechanized, unstoppable. And when intelligence reports begin circulating about Soviet women flying outdated wooden biplanes, the reaction is not fear, it's ridicule. Wooden planes, canvas wings, open cockpits. Machines that belonged in museums, not modern war. But desperation has a way of reshaping what war looks like. The Soviet Union is bleeding, cities are burning, entire armies are being swallowed whole, with male pilots dying faster than they can be replaced. Marina Raskova, a famous aviator and national hero, makes an unthinkable proposal to Stalin himself: all-female combat aviation units, night bombers, fighters, dive bombers. Stalin agrees, not because he believes in symbolism, but because he has no other choice. Among these women is a group barely in their 20s, students, farm girls, teachers. They are issued Polikarpov Po-2s, slow, obsolete biplanes made of wood and fabric. No armor, no radar, no radios, sometimes not even parachutes. German pilots joke that shooting one down isn't worth the ammunition. What the Germans don't understand is that these planes were never meant to fight them head-on. They were meant to haunt them. The women train fast, brutally fast. They learn to fly by moonlight, to navigate by rivers and shadows, to drop bombs by instinct rather than instruments. Their missions begin after midnight, when exhaustion dulls the senses and fear grows louder than reason. They take off in pairs or threes, flying low, hugging the earth. And then comes the decision that will change everything. As they approach German positions, the pilots cut their engines. The propellers stop. The wind takes over. The Po-2s glide silently toward enemy camps like drifting ghosts. No engine noise, no warning, just the faint rush of air, the sound German soldiers would soon swear was a witch's broomstick cutting through the night sky. By the time the bombs fall, it's already too late. At first, German units report the attacks as isolated nuisances, minor harassment, but the missions don't stop. Night after night, the women return, sometimes flying up to 15 missions in a single night. Sleep becomes impossible, nerves begin to crack. Soldiers start firing wildly into the darkness, wasting ammunition on shadows. Officers notice morale slipping, not because of heavy losses, but because of relentless fear. These pilots aren't just dropping bombs, they're stealing rest, sanity, control. German commanders face a dilemma. The Po-2s are too slow for radar, too low for flak, too maneuverable for fast fighter aircraft to track in the dark. Chasing them often leads to crashes. One Luftwaffe pilot complains it's like trying to swat a mosquito in a hurricane. Moments like this changed history, hit like, so this story reaches more people. Inside the Soviet cockpits, the reality is just as brutal. Frostbite numbs fingers. Anti-aircraft fire tears holes through wings held together by wire and glue. When a plane goes down, it often burns instantly. There are no ejections, no second chances. The women know this. They fly anyway. What drives them isn't ideology alone. It's fury at invasion, at loss, at being dismissed as weak. Every successful mission is personal. Every return to base feels borrowed. Then comes the turning point. By 1943, German intelligence formally recognizes the threat. Reports describe psychological terror bombings. Soldiers refuse night patrols. Some units begin sleeping during the day and fighting exhaustion at night, the opposite of how war is meant to function. The nickname spreads through the ranks: Nachthexen, night witches. What began as laughter has turned into superstition. One German officer later admits that daylight bombers frightened him less than those silent gliders. At least during the day, you could see death coming. For the women, recognition comes at a cost. Missions grow more dangerous as German defenses adapt. Losses mount. Friends disappear between takeoff and landing. Yet the flights continue because stopping would mean surrendering the night, and the night now belongs to them. When the war finally grinds toward its bloody conclusion, the impact of the Night Witches is undeniable. They flew over 23,000 missions, dropped thousands of tons of bombs, and forced a modern army to fear the dark. But their greatest victory isn't measured in targets destroyed. It's measured in shattered assumptions. The idea that power always looks loud, that terror requires size, that war belongs only to men with steel and speed. The Night Witches proved that silence, precision, and relentless resolve could break an enemy's mind just as effectively as firepower. After the war, many of these women returned to obscurity. Their planes are scrapped, their stories muted, but the soldiers who faced them never forget the sound or the lack of it. Share this story with someone who thinks WWII outcomes were inevitable. Because history isn't just shaped by generals and machines. Sometimes it's shaped by a quiet glide through the darkness, and the moment laughter turns into fear. For the women who survived, the silence didn't end when the war did. In the months after Germany's surrender, the airfields emptied. The Po-2s, those fragile wooden machines that had terrified entire divisions, were pushed aside, dismantled, forgotten. Medals were awarded, hands were shaken, photographs were taken, and then the country moved on. Rebuilding cities mattered more than remembering nights in the sky. Many of the Night Witches returned to ordinary lives that felt almost unreal after years of living on the edge of death. Some became teachers again, some engineers. Some never spoke publicly about the war at all, not because they were ashamed, but because there were no words that could explain what it meant to glide, engine cut, toward a line of enemy guns, knowing a single spark could turn fabric and wood into fire. Others tried to explain and found that people struggled to listen. The post-war Soviet narrative favored tanks, generals, and massive offensives. Psychological warfare didn't fit neatly into victory parades. An all-female regiment flying museum-grade aircraft didn't match the image of unstoppable industrial power. Their story became a footnote, whispered among veterans, rarely taught, often simplified into myth. But on the other side, among former German soldiers, the memory stayed sharp. Interviews decades later reveal something unusual. Veterans who barely remembered specific battles vividly recalled the nights, the waiting, the exhaustion, the terror of lying in a trench, staring at the sky, straining to hear something, anything, before the bombs fell. Some admitted they fired blindly into darkness just to feel less helpless. Others confessed they began to fear sleep itself. This was not fear of destruction. It was fear of uncertainty. Military historians later struggled to categorize what the Night Witches had done. Strategically, their bombs rarely destroyed major infrastructure. Tactically, they were a nuisance rather than a decisive force. And yet, German operational reports prove their effectiveness. Units disrupted, supply lines slowed, morale degraded, resources diverted to counter a threat that couldn't be cleanly neutralized. The Night Witches didn't break the enemy's body. They broke his rhythm. And in war, rhythm is everything. Modern psychologists would later identify this as sustained low-level trauma, stress without release. No clear battles, no victory moments, just constant anticipation. It's the same principle behind sleep deprivation tactics and psychological operations used decades later. The Night Witches were doing it instinctively, long before the science caught up. What makes their story even more unsettling is how close it came to never happening at all. Had Marina Raskova not insisted? Had Stalin dismissed the idea? Had those early training crashes convinced commanders the experiment wasn't worth it? The night skis of the Eastern Front would have sounded very different. Sometimes history pivots not on brilliance, but on someone refusing to accept laughter as an answer. There's another truth that often goes unspoken. The Night Witches succeeded because they were underestimated, and they paid for it in blood. German pilots eventually learned how to hunt them, flying slower, lower, risking stalls and crashes to match the Po-2s. Anti-aircraft gunners refined their timing. Losses increased. Entire crews vanished without wreckage ever being found. When one plane failed to return, there was rarely a body to bury, only a name crossed out on a board. Yet the missions continued. Because quitting would have meant confirming every insult that had been thrown at them at the start, that they were temporary, replaceable, a novelty born of desperation. They refused that ending. By the time the regiment was finally disbanded, dozens of its pilots had earned the title Hero of the Soviet Union, one of the highest honors possible. But honors don't quiet nightmares. They don't erase the image of a friend's plane erupting in flame just meters ahead. Years later, one pilot described the war this way: "We were afraid every time. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was flying anyway." That sentence lingers because it cuts through the mythology. The Night Witches were not fearless legends. They were young women who learned to weaponize fear, their enemy, and their own. Their legacy stretches far beyond World War II. Today, military academies study psychological warfare as seriously as firepower. Stealth isn't just about technology anymore, it's about perception. Control the enemy's mind, and you don't always need to destroy his forces. In a strange way, the Night Witches were ahead of their time. And perhaps that's why their story still feels uncomfortable. It challenges how we define strength, how we imagine warfare, who we expect to survive history, and who we quietly erase once they've served their purpose. When German soldiers laughed at those wooden planes, they weren't just mocking outdated technology. They were mocking the idea that power could come from anywhere other than steel, speed, and men who looked like them. The laughter didn't last. What remained was silence, the kind that settles before impact, before realization, before history shifts direction in the dark. And somewhere in that silence, the sound of fabric wings gliding through cold night aired proof that even in the most mechanized war ever fought, fear could still arrive on something as fragile as wood and canvas. Long after the guns fell silent across Europe, the question lingered not in official histories, but in personal memories. How had something so small caused so much fear? The answer lies in a truth wars rarely admit. Victory isn't always decided by who has the biggest weapons, the fastest machines, or the most men. Sometimes it's decided by who understands the human mind better, who knows how fear grows in the dark, how exhaustion bends judgment, how humiliation can rot morale from the inside out. The Night Witches understood this instinctively. They didn't try to outgun the Luftwaffe. They didn't chase glory or dramatic victories. They focused on something more fragile and more powerful: control. Control of the night, control of sleep, control of certainty. Every silent glide whispered the same message to the men below: you are never safe, not even now. And once that idea takes hold, no trench, no bunker, no command order can fully erase it. In the decades that followed, fragments of their story surfaced in memoirs, declassified reports, and quiet interviews. Slowly, the caricature faded. The witches were no longer superstition or propaganda. They were pilots, tacticians, survivors, human beings who had been forced into an impossible war and found a way to fight on their own terms. Today, restored Po-2s sit in museums, their frames fragile, almost unimpressive at first glance. Visitors often walk past them quickly, drawn instead to tanks and jets and steel giants. But those who stop, who read the names, who imagine the cold air biting through an open cockpit at 2 a.m., begin to understand. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, cuts its engine, and lets gravity do the rest. The Night Witches didn't just challenge the enemy. They challenged the story of World War II itself, the idea that only overwhelming force shapes outcomes, that innovation belongs exclusively to advanced technology, that courage must look a certain way. They proved that resilience could be improvised, that fear could be turned outward, that even in a war defined by machines, the human element still decided everything. And perhaps that is their greatest legacy. Not the bombs dropped, not the missions counted, not even the terror they inspired, but the reminder that history is never as inevitable as it pretends to be, and that sometimes the people history laughs at first are the ones it remembers last. Because when the engines went silent, the world finally listened.